Good evening, everybody. And Julian, thank you for that fantastic introduction. I haven't got the lady's phone number yet, but I will by the end of the evening. There's a slightly strange feeling about attending this meeting tonight, because I received a phone call back in October from Graham Booth, my old friend and colleague, somebody that I'd spent nearly 7 years in the European Parliament with, and a great friend. And indeed, for anyone that reads the book that Steve talked about, I named Graham as one of the 3 people that really made my career in politics possible because of his support, generosity and loyalty over many, many years. And it was Graham that rang me up and said, would you come and speak in February at a meeting in Torquay? And I'm here, and of course, very sadly, Graham Booth is not here. And as you all know, died after a short illness at the not very advanced age of 71. And I was very honoured to be asked by the family to deliver the eulogy at his funeral. But I just want to say, for those of you here that did know him, and for those of you here that didn't know him, he was very much a character in politics, and somebody in politics who wasn't doing it for his own benefit. It wasn't about rank, it wasn't about title, it wasn't about position. For Graham, it was an absolutely strong, heartfelt belief that England and Britain mattered, that those that had gone before us had been prepared to give and sacrifice so much to defend, that he couldn't stand idly by, whilst all of that was being betrayed by career politicians who frankly couldn't give a damn about this country or its people. And that was what motivated Graham to get involved with politics, and why I was proud to have him as a friend and a colleague, and why his passing should be mourned very sadly, particularly here in Torbay, his home. But he also had something else that career politicians don't have. I mean, aren't they just the dullest bunch of people you've ever come across in your life? I mean, believe me, an evening out with Nick Clegg is not a rip-roaring load of fun. I know, I've tried it. And none of them have a sense of humour. They're all so terrified that if they say anything that could be misconstrued or taken out of place, somehow they'll lose their popularity. And such things didn't worry Graham at all, because Graham came from the real world. You know, he spent the whole of his life running with his wife Pam the Torbay Holiday Motel, and in fact the entire list of staff, I think, were his extended family. Graham was rooted in the real world. And when you look at Cameron, Clegg, and, oh, what is the Labour leader's name? I've forgotten, he's so boring. But when you look at those 3 people, you realise what we've got are career politicians. Yeah. They're almost like cardboard cutouts. They look the same, they sound the same, they have the same backgrounds. Hardly any of them have ever spent a day of their lives working in the real world. They are detached from the real. I always feel this gives me a tremendous advantage, because I spent 20 years before getting involved in politics working in the City of London, working in the commodity markets on a thing called the London Metal Exchange, where we bought and sold copper, aluminium, lead, tin, zinc, nickel. So I actually had a grounding in the real world, unlike those 3. And as I often say, you know, for 20 years in the city, I worked damned hard up until lunchtime, every single day. It often would tail off a bit after that. But the thing that got me involved in politics was a day in 1990, October 1990, and it had been a very quiet day on the Exchange, not much going on, and we were all over the road, in the pub, bemoaning our luck, and saying we're not earning any money, and somebody ran in and said, we've joined the exchange rate mechanism. And I said, we can't have done, it's not possible. You know, Alan Walters and all the big economists have been saying what a mistake it would be, but sure enough, we joined the exchange rate mechanism. Now, I know for the younger members of the audience, 1990 seems like ancient history, but let me explain. The exchange rate mechanism was a declaration for the British government that we would peg the level of sterling against the Deutschmark as a precursor to us joining the euro. So please, folks, don't forget that. It was a Conservative government with the support of the Lib Dems and Labour that wanted Britain to join the European single currency, which became the euro. Now, I'm not going to tell you at a family gathering what my first utterances were on hearing that we should join this thing. But suffice to say that I felt from day one that it simply wouldn't work. That you can't fuse together different countries with different economies, with different patterns of trade across the world, that it simply wouldn't work. And I also felt, even back then, that if you look through history, every single time governments decide that they know what the right price of something is, they have a 100% record of total and absolute failure. So I became an ERM bore, and to anyone that would listen, I would bore them on why the ERM was no damn good and would do us harm. Well, sure enough, by September 1992, within 2 years, we had experienced record bankruptcies in companies, record levels of house repossessions, and 1 million people had unnecessarily been put on the unemployment scrap heap because our interest rates were double what they should have been to keep us pegged at this level against the Deutschmark. So it struck me all the way back then that our career politicians were prepared to sacrifice the well-being of millions of people in Britain just to pursue this dream that was being part of this new emerging United States of Europe. And I said, I want none of this, and I'm going to dedicate myself to campaigning against it, and that is why I'm here. Now, I'm not going to say, I told you so, but I did get up 6 years ago in the European Parliament, and remembering all the arguments and all the reasons from 1990 why I recognised and realised that the exchange rate mechanism would not work for Britain, I pointed out 6 years ago that Greece was headed for a problem. That the movements in the international financial markets were telling us that Greece was headed for a problem. And if my original analysis that you couldn't put countries as diverse as Britain and Germany together in a single economic and monetary union were true, well, how true is it, obviously, to any sensible, fair-minded person that you can't put economies as different as Germany and Greece together in a single economic and monetary union? And what we've witnessed and what we've seen over the course of the last 2 years is an emerging tragedy. And that is no overstatement. Because for those that don't know what's happening in Greece, let me tell you, 25% of all private companies have gone bankrupt in the last 4 years. Youth unemployment in Greece now stands at 50%. The Greek economy has declined, contracted by 14% in the last 5 years. Even in the 1930s in Britain, when we lived through the Depression, when we finished up with the Jarrow marches, then the total contraction of the UK economy from the beginning to the end was 10%. In Greece it's 14% already, but now that rate of contraction is accelerating, and it's projected the economy will contract at a further 7% this year. And what about the Greek people? What about the people who actually invented democracy all those years ago? Who runs Greece now? Well, they had an elected Prime Minister. And I'm telling you this story because this story gets to the heart of what the modern day European Union is. It is not just a bunch of bungling idiots. Now, I know I have accused one or two of them in the past of being bungling, but it actually represents a failed political ideology which they refuse to let go. And the way in which they're behaving to defend that ideology tells me that this European project isn't just bad for our country, it's bad for the whole of Europe, and it's leading us to hell in a handcart. Because what they've done with Greece, when their Prime Minister last year, Mr. Papandreou, got up and said, I'm going to give the people of Greece a referendum so that they can decide whether they want to be in the euro or whether they want to leave. Well, the word referendum in Brussels is in fact treated rather like blasphemy. And they were having none of it. and the bully boys decided that Papandreou had to go. And he's been replaced by a new Prime Minister, a Mr. Papademos, whose curriculum vitae is as follows. He was governor of the Bank of Greece at the time they joined the euro. Therefore is the man responsible for fiddling the figures and for getting Greece into a currency union for which she was never suited. His payoff for that was he then became the deputy governor of the European Central Bank and has worked there ever since, overseeing the introduction of the euro in these countries. He is now a puppet Prime Minister of Greece, and once every fortnight an aeroplane comes in and lands at Athens airport. Lands more safely than some of my aeroplanes land from time to time, but there we are. And an aeroplane comes into Athens once a fortnight, and on it are what is called the Troika. And one is a representative of the International Monetary Fund. Another is a representative of the European Commission, and the third is the representative of the European Central Bank. 3 foreign unelected bureaucrats, once a fortnight, come into Athens to go and tell the puppet what he may and may not do. And the puppet then takes that stuff to the Greek Parliament, and the Greek Parliament, most of them, have about as much spine as our politicians, and they're terrified, and they do what they're told. What does that mean for the Greek people? Well, I would put it to you that the reason that democracy works is that even if you don't like the government of the day, you say to yourself, I am going to work in the next general election to get this lot of so-and-sos kicked out and to replace them with somebody else with a completely different manifesto. The point about democracy is that it acts as the most fantastic safety valve. You may not like it, but there's always the possibility that through your vote, you can change your destiny. But in Greece now, it doesn't really matter, does it? Who's in power? Whether it's the Conservative Party, whether it's the Socialist Party, because all power, all control of that country has been handed over to the puppet and 3 foreign bureaucrats. And the Greeks, as I just described to you economically, are being driven into the ground by being stuck inside a currency that is probably nearly 70% overvalued for what they need. The Greeks are being driven into the ground because they have debts that are so big they cannot even service the interest on it, and the response from Brussels is to say, we're going to force you to borrow some more. That's what's going on at the moment. The Greeks are being forced to borrow another 130 billion euros. There is, in my opinion, absolutely no prospect of them ever being able to pay these loans back, and I think it is absolutely outrageous that a British government, through David Cameron, has already committed 12 billion sterling, which is £150 for every household in Britain, to the bailouts already, and that we're now on the verge of doubling again our contribution to the IMF, so that all of you can be part of this disaster that is befalling Greece. And our message to David Cameron, our message to Clegg, our message to the British Parliament is that actually what we're doing with this medicine is we're killing the patient. And that for the sake of Greece and for the sake of British taxpayers, we do not want 1 penny piece more of British taxpayers' money being used to fund these hopeless and disastrous bailouts. And what can the people of Greece do? Their democracy taken from them, their self-respect and pride taken from them. Is it any wonder that 80,000 of them on Sunday week back took to the streets and tried to storm the Parliament? Is it any wonder? Because desperate people are pushed into desperate measures. And you saw the flames, you saw the buildings in Athens burning, and I honestly predict, and I mean this, that if we go on doing this to Greece, we will drive that country into a violent revolution.